The following program is a special presentation of News 4.
Look into the faces of the Polish people. And you will find the Polish Pope. Look into the face of the Pope, and you will see the man whose wisdom and courage inspired a nation in its fight for freedom.
In the hour ahead, we believe you will learn something new about this Polish Pope who helped change the course of history, the powerful ties that link Western New York to Poland, and the new challenges that now face the Polish people.
Rich Newberg reports. Tonight, the People's Pope, his triumphant return to his homeland, and the Western New Yorkers who had a front row seat to history.
On Tuesday, May 18, 1920, Marshal Józef Piłsudski was triumphantly received in Warsaw as the conquering hero of the war with the Soviet Union. His victory in Kiev became known as the Miracle of the Vistula, the river running through the capital. Downstream, in the small town of Wadowice, on this very same day, a son would be born to Karol and Emilia Wojtyła. Perhaps it was Providence that Karol Józef Wojtyła would one day lead the largest organized religion in the world.
Welcome to Poland.
The welcome is for a Western New York delegation hoping to meet the Pope.
Welcome to Poland.
They are no strangers to Poland. Some made the journey many times when the country was under the yoke of communism.
It's a wonderful thing to see our homeland thriving when for so many years when Dick Selecki and I were here under communism, it was deader than a doornail.
Are you worried today?
Western New York physicians will again offer help to Polish children, performing operations and donating much-needed equipment to Polish hospitals and universities. The Pope knows of their works, knows that they are helping the sick, the poor, and the needy.
I would like to say hands of love. The spirit of Pope is with us here in this hospital by your help.
The spirit of John Paul II was in fact filling the hearts of his countrymen all through Poland, many believing this may be his final journey home.
The spiritual journey of Karol Wojtyła began here in the small town of Wadowice. That was his church, and it remains the cornerstone of this town to this very day.
From those who will be tomorrow's leaders to the old parishioners who, like the Pope, have weathered the onslaught of stormtroopers and the iron fist of communist rule, the church has been the one constant in their lives and the life of their country. Today at Our Lady of Perpetual Help, they would consecrate a special outdoor altar in preparation for the Pope's visit to his hometown. 70 years ago, any one of these children could have been Karol Wojtyła, only he was an intensely spiritual child.
He was always very deep in his thoughts. When he was praying in the church, it was just like he was disappearing and being in another space. Always with his thoughts somewhere else. It was more spiritual, very deeply thinking.
Władysław Zibek-Krzyżewski was his childhood friend, who now leads the people of Wadowice in song and coordinates the choirs when the Pope returns home. His own childhood memories with Karol Wojtyła are vivid. The young Wojtyła, he says, always stood out from all other children.
He was always more spiritual, more deep into prayers. It was just always different, always much more into it.
But just as these children also have lives outside of the church, Karol Wojtyła's worldly interests included soccer, scouting, and acting.
Whenever there was a need to recite poems, it was always Karol Wojtyła on the stage. Later on, I took over this privilege to recite poems. But whatever he was doing, it was always very high quality.
But he was also human. And perhaps that's why Władysław's sister delights in telling the story of how young Lolek, that was his affectionate nickname, once got into some trouble for leaning on the wrong ledge.
And Karol leaned his elbow against the wall, which was part of it was just built up to freshly to the building, and then it just fell off. And then their neighbor that lived on the opposite side of the street, he came up to here and he said, "You know who did it? I knew, I saw him. It was Lolek Wojtyła."
Lolek had been especially close to his mother, Emilia. It's been said they would often read scripture together. But when the child was 8 years old, returning home from school one day, he learned that his mother had died. She was 45 years old. 11 years later, Karol Wojtyła would find the words in a poem he wrote to express his grief. Over your white grave, white flowers of life bloom. Years have gone by without you. How many years? Over your white grave, O Mother, my extinct beloved, for a son's full love, a prayer, eternal rest. His grief would be magnified 2 more times when his older brother he so admired, the brother who taught him how to ski and to take extended hikes into the mountains, died suddenly at the age of 26. Karol was now just 11 years old. And then his father, who had taken on the roles of mother and friend to his only remaining son, died before Karol's 21st birthday. Others also honor the memory of the Pope's family and find strength from Karol Wojtyła's courage and faith. This man never knew his father and had an alcoholic for a mother.
I was impressed with how strong a person he became after all he'd experienced as a child. When he lost first his mother as a young boy, then his brother, then his father, and actually he went through all these dramatic moments in his youth and still managed to become someone very special and important and great.
To move even closer to the Pope, Polish schoolchildren are brought to his birthplace, now a museum. They identify with his struggles and follow his path to greatness. He is their Holy Father, also a man they truly love.
He's a great person. He's marvelous. I don't know. I just love him. The way he is, thinks, he talks, that's great.
Many would treasure a moment in his presence. When we come back, we'll show you why Western New Yorkers have many treasured moments to remember.
Cardinal Wyszynski asked the Pope for the apostolic blessing of all of Poland. The Pontiff is embracing him. Tears. And his answer is obvious.
The white smoke on October 16, 1978, signaled that the College of Cardinals had finally elected a new pope following a deadlock on Italian candidates who had been favored. Few, if any, pilgrims who had gathered in St. Peter's Square expected the new successor of Peter to be a Pole. Cardinal Karol Wojtyła became the first non-Italian pope in 456 years. It's God's will, he said, just before accepting the papacy and making his appearance to the world. It was his belief in divine providence that had gotten him through the tragic losses of his loved ones and several close brushes with death. As a child in Wadowice, he dodged a bullet from a loaded gun accidentally fired by a friend. He was struck by a Nazi truck in occupied Krakow and remained unconscious for 9 hours with a brain concussion. He later said, "Providence saved me." And later, as Pope, he was shot by would-be assassin Mehmet Ali Aga as thousands of pilgrims and tourists watched in horror. The bullet had just missed his central aorta, but after leaving his body, also struck a woman from Buffalo, Anne Audrey. Only weeks after they both were shot, the Pope asked to see her. It was an extraordinary meeting, also attended by Mrs. Audrey's daughter, Joanne, and son, Michael.
When he initially came out, he gave the traditional Polish greeting of when you meet someone, Jak będzie pochwalony Jezus Chrystus, and my mother and my sister and I all answered him back in Polish, because I remember that. And after that, he came over and blessed my mom, and they talked for a while, and he gave a general blessing to everyone that was there. And then my mom asked if she could touch his face, and as she did, she gave him a kiss, and he gave her a kiss back and drew the sign of the cross on her forehead. It's very moving. There's no way to describe it.
Fate had created another link in a chain of events connecting the Pontiff to the Niagara frontier. As Cardinal, Karol Wojtyła would visit Western New York in 1969 and 76. Niagara Falls businessman John Kopczynski played host to the Wojtyła delegation and remembers feeling something very special about the man.
That he was a man with a purpose. You'd almost feel that no matter who he was talking to, wherever he was walking, what he was doing, there was a purpose. Although a very down-to-earth person, you could relax with him. In fact, we had cocktails, they had beer when we were in Niagara Falls. So to this day, I refer to the Pope as my drinking buddy.
The visit was said to be his favorite in the States. And when Karol Wojtyła became Pope, it was no coincidence that Western New Yorkers were seated closest to him in Rome.
There were thousands and thousands of people, yet we were seated right up front, dead center, the whole Niagara Frontier delegation. That confirmed their feeling toward this area, and they have a warm spot for this area right along. In fact, as I recall, even at the ceremony at St. Peter's Square, the Pope looked up and Bishop Head was there. Of course, he's always a head taller than anybody else. He said, "I remember that priest." He said it out loud, you know.
They would witness the humility of this new pope in one of the most touching moments of the papacy, when John Paul II embraced his mentor, the primate of Poland, Stefan Wyszynski, and would not have him kneel before him.
"20 years later, Western New Yorkers still have a front row seat to history.
A front row seat in an audience of 500,000 people.
It was a sea of people. It was a note of optimism for Poland after being dominated by communism for 2 generations. And it was sort of like a final circle that has been completed for freedom and opportunity to the Polish people. And they were basically coming there to say thank you to the Holy Father for giving that spiritual backbone for the revolution.
On this occasion, we should pray for peace between people in our families around the world.
The people of Torun, Poland line the streets of their city for just a glimpse of the Pope during his motorcade.
As everybody in Poland, I'm very proud of our Pope, you know, just because he's Polish. And he came here to be with all Torun people. So I'm very proud.
There is another story unfolding here in the city of Copernicus. This one involves young lives, some giving doctors from Western New York, and the Pope.
She looks wonderful.
Her name is Dominika, and she's come to see the Pope. She's come a long way regarding her own health. About 4.5 years ago, the little girl from Gdańsk, Poland was brought to Buffalo's Children's Hospital for life-saving heart surgery. The operation was donated by Dr. Elliot Rosencrantz, and her expenses were covered by Buffalo eye surgeon Dr. Amar Atwal.
It's miraculous to see her growing up and being so vibrant and healthy right now. She looks wonderful.
As does Michael Nowatinsky, who is walking pretty well these days. He had a large vascular tumor on his left foot when Dr. Jeffrey Meilman first saw him in Poland a year ago. His doctors had been considering amputating the foot, but Meilman thought he could save it.
It looked like a tumor that could be treated. We made arrangements within a month or so to bring him to Buffalo, which we did, and he was there about 6 months ago at Kenmore Mercy Hospital.
I go to Buffalo, and he helped me. Now it's gone. I feel good. I haven't got pain. Everything's okay. I'm normal man.
Then there's Mernoush Tafreshi, a Muslim girl from Iran who had been losing her sight and had sent a passionate plea to the Pope. It read in part, "This is my cry for your unrestrained and benevolent help, Your Holiness, to save a girl, hardly a teenager, from blindness."
Hello. Hello, dear. How nice to
meet you. Thank you.
When the Pope answered her cry, Western New York physicians were contacted and volunteered to sponsor her journey with her mother, first to Buffalo for treatment and then to Poland to hopefully meet John Paul II. She saw a wonder of the world, and though one of her eyes was too damaged for an operation, doctors worked to prevent the retina in her healthier left eye from detaching. So these patients were among the doctors and Polish Americans from Western New York, anxiously awaiting the arrival of Pope John Paul II at the end of the procession in Torun.
Oh my gosh, there he is, Alex. Oh my, look how small.
Would he stop and offer his special blessings? The answer would be yes.
Come up here. From Buffalo, New York. Your Holiness, a message, please, to Buffalo and Niagara Falls, how you want to be remembered to the people of Buffalo.
Zostawcie na boku.
God bless all of you. And then the Pope made his way toward these pilgrims who traveled so far to see him and blessed them one by one, beginning with Mernouche.
This is the girl from Iran, Your Holiness, you asked us to bring to Buffalo for the eye surgery.
For many, there seems to be something almost mystical about meeting this people's Pope, something beyond what words can describe. For though he is the Holy Father of Roman Catholics the world over, he has also reached out to people of all faiths, calling for tolerance and understanding in a deeply troubled world. He has in fact changed the world by standing up for human rights and religious freedom. And for those in his flock who do follow his lead, a precious moment on a street in Turin will no doubt leave an everlasting impression on the heart, the mind, and the soul.
The Pope is God's presence to us, Christ's presence to us on earth, and it's just like overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. Very powerful. He's a holy man. He'll be a saint. I'm blessed. I'm humbled that I'm here to see him and to greet him. I'm very humbled.
A picture of post-communist Poland. There's color and a carefree atmosphere in some of the big cities like Warsaw. There's a spirit of optimism in the air.
I think everybody believes for a nice future for our country, especially young generation.
In this free market economy, they are learning what sells and how to sell it. What sparks the imagination opens the pocketbook.
Clinton, Monica, Paula, Hillary, saxophone. Clinton president Stanów Zjednoczonych.
The shortages of goods and those bread lines of even a decade ago are history now.
The Russians tried to starve the people to turn against solidarity. Then they tried to freeze the people without coal. Western New York has been in the forefront. We were the first ones in the United States to have telethons when there were dark, cold, hungry days for solidarity. Western New York and Buffalo was there with $605,000 for food and medicine.
It's hard to express how big is the change, because we remember the shortage in our shops, ugly, dirty shops, but now you see, we can see here, in the shop, the real change.
We're in a modern shopping mall in the seaport city of Gdynia, and here they have the same types of upscale specialty shops that you'd find in the States.
We see that the windows are nice design, they put it, they combine, here you see cheese, wine, so it means that somebody thinks about how it should look, what people like.
But appearances can be deceiving.
The difference between the prices and what we earn is too big.
People can't keep up with inflation, but it's hard to say no in a world of plenty.
Well, it's very difficult to save if somebody works in a basic job without trying to earn some extra money. So it's quite difficult to save any money. People
more or less spend everything that they get.
But for many of Poland's young people coming into their own, they'd much rather have these problems than dealing with the dark, dingy past, when children were sometimes asked by their parents to wait in those dreaded food lines. In Europe, they call it queuing up.
Yeah, I was a kid and I was standing and queuing for the bread when I was younger. And I just remember the fact that I couldn't sleep. That was frustrating for me when I was a kid. Just my mother woke me up and said, just go and queue for the bread. So
You had to wait in line. How long for bread?
Sometimes for 1 hour.
The irony, it's been said, is that in the communist days, you might have a little money in your pocket, but nothing to buy on the shelves. Now the shelves and the racks are stocked full, but many can't afford the luxuries.
We have clothes for everybody, for old people and for young people, for women who are fat and for women who are slim, for everybody. And some people can buy almost anything because are really, really rich. But some of them are so poor and they could buy nothing.
And do they come here and look anyway?
Yes, and look and say, oh my God, what's the price? Oh, they are so surprised and they're not happy because, for example, their salary is not enough to buy blouses or t-shirts even.
Back in Warsaw, street vendors are having a tough time making profits. The cost of renting space is 5 times as high as it was 5 years ago. Only the young, they say, have a chance to make it.
I think for young people is good in a way, but I am in middle 50. It's too late for me.
As change sweeps through Poland, many of the older people are being left behind. They simply cannot adjust to the new economy.
This man, instead of spending his golden years in retirement, is forced to peddle souvenirs on the street. He says he'd rather be living under the old system.
Because I have no money for my life. Yes, if you think about the freedom, you have more freedom. Yes, it's true, but I have no money, just the freedom.
There are growing concerns among those on fixed incomes that they won't be able to pay the rent. We're told evictions are running high in some parts of Poland, with a suicide rate that's also climbing. There can no longer be a total dependence on government. The individual is being put to the test.
The people who have enough courage in themselves, inside, to change things, they can do that. In the past, even if people, had enough courage, they were somehow limited by many, many factors.
One Pole whose courage is legendary is Lech Wałęsa.
Hello again. We met back in 1985, and it was a difficult time. It was the anniversary of the Gdansk Accords.
Difficult times are what made Lech Wałęsa, the unemployed electrician from a poor farm family who rose to lead striking workers at the Lenin shipyard.
Nieznajomość premiuje.
There are times when there are surprises and things that we don't anticipate happen.
Ja byłem takim zaskoczeniem.
And I was such a surprise.
The shipyard strike would lead to a strike of factory workers throughout Poland, and eventually an agreement with the Polish government, giving birth to the Solidarity Movement, a free trade union movement that would draw support from President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II.
W większości dość komunizmu.
And there was a time when we all had enough of communism.
I prezydent Reagan,
and President Reagan,
i Lech Wałęsa,
and Lech Wałęsa,
i Ojciec Święty.
And the Holy Father.
I nie umawialiśmy się.
And we didn't have to come to an agreement on that.
Czasy do tego dojrzały.
The times were just ripe for that.
But Wałęsa's time has apparently passed. After winning the Nobel Peace Prize and becoming the president of his country, he is now again out of a job, forming his own political party, but being blamed by many for not doing enough for his fellow workers when he was at the very top. It's made him a bit cynical.
They'll probably put up a lot of monuments after my death. My biggest critics will be giving me the best epilogue to my grave. And if I could kick them from the grave, I would.
If he's looking for support in the shipyard where it all started, he won't find it here. It's rusting away. Its workforce is disappearing. The name of Lech Wałęsa is no longer magic here.
I think it's going to be difficult for him because many people here feel betrayed. We were promised employment and work, and in a split second, we woke up, and many of us who fought in the battle and the revolution found ourselves without employment and in difficult times.
The yard that launched a revolution is bankrupt. The workforce reduced from 14,000 to about 2,500.
Shipyard workers as a group feel betrayed because Wałęsa, when he was president, maybe he had an opportunity to help take care of some of the debts in the shipyard.
I guess, you know, he's got his place in history, and no one can take that away from him, and I still think he has a part to play. What the future holds, I don't know, but you heard all sorts of stories, that his time has passed, or he's going to run for president and win, so you don't know, what's going to happen.
Wałęsa says he understands that everybody has their own time, but feels he is being made to pay a price, even though the revolution he helped spearhead was successful.
The seed has to fall and die before you have a blossom.
But new seeds of discontent are now taking root in the very heart of Poland. The country's nurses are demonstrating for more pay and better working conditions. They say they make the equivalent of $140 a month.
The nurses here, the midwives and the emergency room nurses, the cleaning ladies in the hospital get better pay than they get in the hospital. She said they're the lowest paying profession in Poland right now.
For the nurses inside this tent, this is day 12 of a hunger strike. It's the new solidarity, and for them, the stakes are just as high as they were back then.
The commitment is total.
Because she has to do this, there is no other way.
How far is she willing to go?
Jak daleko z tym pójdziesz?
Do końca.
To the end. To the end.
The old solidarity, they say, is now part of the government and is not listening.
If they fail, it means the other unions will be failing because they'll be going after them one by one, and everyone will fail. So eventually they're going to have to come together.
Przykre jest to bardzo. Niejednokrotnie płaczemy.
It's very sad. There's many nights I lay in bed and cry.
Możemy pochodzić tylko po wystawach i pooglądać.
Their enjoyment is walking the streets and looking into the windows and seeing what's for, what they could buy and only wish.
Najgorzej jest powiedzieć dziecku, że nie można czegoś kupić.
And the most difficult part is to tell your son or your daughter, your little one, that you can't buy what you really like to buy for them.
Freedom brought the promise of the good life. A better life for the children. But most agree it will take time in a country where struggle has defined the national character, and faith in more than just the material has kept the Polish spirit alive. There are few things that seem to openly delight Pope John Paul II more than being in the presence of children. They are growing up in a world many believe is lacking in moral direction. But the Pope has taken criticism for his rigid stand against birth control, his insistence on priestly celibacy, and his restrictions on the role of women in the church. And some of his critics have come from the new generation of Catholics. Even at the Pope's 1993 World Youth Convention in Denver, there were some young dissenting views, including a teenager from Western New York.
I'm kind of worried on the birth control issue, but because with the increase in sexually transmitted diseases, I think pretty soon it's going to become necessary because there are people who will have premarital sex. I think today especially, I think women should be clergy because with the shortage of priests, we're going to eventually need them, and I think that it's in the heart, you know, they're the same people inside, doesn't matter.
The church erupted in cheers.
Others see the need to stick to fundamentals as a tumultuous century draws to a close.
He's rock solid. He brings us back to our religious roots, and I think we've been extremely fortunate to have him as the Holy Father for these years, closing the 20th century and going into the next, in a century that really has seen the most rapid progress in science and technology, a century at the same time that has been the most murderous and barbarous in history, with genocides, with the Gulag, concentration camps, prison hospitals, godless ideologies. He's seen that firsthand. So he knows the danger of godless ideologies.
As a seminarian in Krakow during the Nazi occupation, Karol Wojtyła would avoid being sent to the camps by working at a chemical plant, while some of his friends were disappearing. During his visit to Poland, the Pope beatified more than 100 martyrs, including the priest Stefan Vincenti Szelchowski, whose life ended in Dachau.
But the memory of the Second World War is still alive. The wounds left by the war will not be completely healed for a long time ahead.
In Warsaw, he prayed at the memorial to Jews who were massacred here. In the spring of 1943, 75,000 Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto decided to resist. That's when the Nazis burned the ghetto to the ground. By June, most of the Jewish fighters were dead. A quarter of Karol Wojtyła's classmates in Wadowice were Jewish, and he has always been sensitive to the horror that befell the Jewish people. Through me, he once said, the church deplores the hatreds, the persecutions, and all the manifestations of anti-Semitism. As Bishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła's diocese had included Auschwitz. Some years ago, as Pope, he returned to the grounds where more than 1 million people were slaughtered, including 75,000 ethnic Poles. It was an emotional moment for the Pope's countrymen.
For Polish people, it's also very important that the world also respects the Polish aspect or the Polish martyrdom, which very often is like a forgotten thing.
Later, many crosses would be erected at Auschwitz, which led to an outcry by world Jewish leaders who said no religious symbols should be posted at the death camp. The Pope has recognized Auschwitz as perhaps the most meaningful symbol of the Holocaust to the Jews, and the crosses came down just before his most recent journey home. Only a papal cross remains, which leaves the issue in controversy. The Pope would help break the Soviet grip on Poland and put an end to communist domination in Europe. In 1979, less than a year after being elevated to the papacy, he made a visit to his homeland. It is estimated about 10 million people saw him in person, a third of the Polish population.
There is nobody in the world who can gather the crowds that he does. There's something about the man that is difficult to explain that draws people.
What we do know about Karol Wojtyła is his ability to enter into deep contemplative prayer. Prayer so deep, one observer said he once heard almost a groan coming from the Pope's lips. As Archbishop of Krakow, he would spend hours and hours in his private chapel and study. From this desk, he would compose pastoral letters and pray for those in his diocese who had asked for his help. His mornings were filled with prayer.
He's so strong because of his very long and deep prayer.
Sometimes he needed even more time for prayer, away from the business of running the diocese.
He would quietly leave the palace and come here to this church across the street to be alone in prayer, sometimes for hours.
One of the Pope's deep concerns is the excesses of capitalism, people getting caught up in the material world. Poland's survival during times of great adversity has been attributed to the power of faith. Some wonder if that power will now be diluted.
Church is not as important to that 18, 20, 25-year-old in Poland nowadays, where when I used to go 20 years ago, and on a Sunday you couldn't get a pew in church. The people were standing outside to hear Mass. Now you see some of the young people are more involved in or more interested in material things, what jeans they're going to own, what kind of car they're going to drive, versus, you know, what really brought about this entire change, the church as well as the Holy Father. And those things are changing, and I don't know if that's good or bad. That's democracy.
I would say it's a danger, but, well, we will see how it develops.
The defeat of communism in Poland developed from an alliance between the Pope and capitalism's biggest proponent, President Ronald Reagan. They had mutual interests. The Pope drew the crowds of the faithful, while the president used a different form of clout, a defense budget of $400 billion a year that helped bankrupt the Soviet Union. General Vernon Walters was the president's emissary to the Pope during those tense days.
He didn't fight them with atomic bombs or conventional weapons. He fought them with the one thing we had more than they did: money.
As all this was happening, Lech Wałęsa pressed forward with the Pope's blessings, and an entire nation moved under the banner of solidarity.
Długo by się to nie zdarzyło jeszcze.
Without the Holy Father, it would have been a long, long time before we could have accomplished
Komunizm by
this.
przegrał, ale gdzie za 30-50 lat?
Communism would have lost, but probably 30, 40 years.
When he visited Cuba in 1998, the country's Catholics were able to publicly celebrate their religious life for the first time in 3 decades. Bishop Henry Manzel, who happened to be ordained by the Pope, had gone to Cuba to witness this incredible event.
They were so excited about the fact that the eyes of the world were upon them. They thought they had been forgotten by the world, and they said, the Holy Father brought the world to us.
Even Fidel Castro seemed intrigued by the Pope's ability to connect with the people.
Pope has had a particular impact on Castro, and this was coming from some authors who are not Cuban but who live in Latin America, and were saying that at some points Castro seemed almost mesmerized by the Holy Father.
The crowd kept interrupting the Pope's address with applause.
They felt there's hope for us now, because the poverty was just so stark and so clear, material poverty. But there was what he elicited and what he really ignited was this spark of faith, this spark of religious hope for religious freedom.
May Cuba, with all its magnificent potential, open itself up to the world, and may the world open itself up to Cuba.
As Pope John Paul II has so often demonstrated, the hope for tomorrow is strengthened by the deeds of today. That's why Western New York doctors were in Poland during the Pope's visit. At the Kutno County Hospital, some youngsters were waiting for plastic surgeon Dr. Jeffrey Meilman. This 11-year-old boy has a 9-year-old scar that could use some attention.
Welcome to this hospital, which is waiting for your help. And we welcome you with the old Polish tradition, with the bread and salt, just like the symbol of our hospitality, brotherhood, and peace.
The Pope had a special association with the medical field dating back to his own childhood.
The Pope's older brother Edmund was a physician who was loved by his patients. He would entertain them and even tell them jokes. But Edmund's life was cut short. When he came down with scarlet fever, he picked it up from the very patients he was trying to help.
It is no wonder the Pope takes extra time reaching out to the sick through doctors like those from Western New York who are willing to give of their time.
How did you get your scar?
Dog.
Dog bite.
Is hurt me.
The cases presented to Dr. Meilman would grow in complexity.
Ah, yes.
This teenager came into contact with a high-tension line.
Hello, Martin.
And this boy, Martin, lost an arm when he was attacked by two dogs on his way home from school. The prosthesis is not functional, just cosmetic. His other arm is practically useless. He must rely on his mother for even simple tasks like getting dressed.
This tragedy of this event that happened was a huge nightmare for the whole family, and everybody was purely touched by it.
Dr. Meilman believes Martin's remaining arm can be made to function again.
I think the function that he could eventually have would be enough to get him by in terms of eating and writing, getting himself dressed. These are things which he cannot do at this point.
Efforts will soon be made to bring Martin to Buffalo for a prosthesis that functions. So many children have been helped through the years by the Polish-American Congress and Western New York doctors. Emilia Smolinska had a hole in her heart mended at Children's Hospital back in 1982. A few years later, a healthy Emilia greeted us with smiles and kisses, as she did once again in Warsaw as a young woman.
I look at Emilia as I look at the nation of Poland. The whole world is before them now, vibrant and prospering, and it's a wonderful thing to see.
Jak dobrze tym dzieckiem być.
Ever since he was a bishop, Karol Wojtyła chose as his official motto the Latin words totus tuos, I am all yours. He has belonged as much to the people as he has to his church.
I had an opportunity to say something that I wanted to say to him, which is that, Holy Father, your life has been a great gift to mankind. He was a man destined for greatness, destined for canonization in my judgment.
He has reigned longer than any other pope in this century, and though his health is failing, he continues his grueling schedule, looking to lead his flock of perhaps 1 billion people into the new millennium. He works as if everything depended on him, said one cardinal, paraphrasing St. Augustine, and he prays as if everything depended on God.
A Polish poet wrote a poem 138 years before he was elected Pope. And he said, in the midst of confusion and dissent in the church, in the midst of people wondering what is happening, God will send a man who will make the truth of God as clear as daylight. He will sweep the sanctuaries clean and make the truth self-evident. See, he comes, the Slavic Pope. I think he fits that description pretty accurately.
History will record John Paul II as the champion of human rights and social justice, who rose from humble roots in rural Poland to lead his church and to bring communism to its knees in his homeland. The first modern pope, as some have called him, who lived to see his countrymen free.
Western New Yorkers have been there every step of the way, from the very first moments of John Paul II's papacy to Solidarity's struggles to the celebration of freedom. And Poles, as the millennium approaches, will no doubt be guided by their unyielding faith and the legacy of the man from Wadowice who changed the world. I'm Rich Newberg. Good night.
To see him vibrant to becoming such an old man, and yet such a great man, such a wonderful man, such a beautiful man. He's like he's carrying all the problems of the world on those shoulders.
I can't put it into words. I'm totally overwhelmed, and I feel so much love from him. I can't put it into words.
I would believe their faith was the central strength that the people had, and this Holy Father is responsible for a great deal of that pride and strength and faith in the church.